Welcome back, folks. Let's go ahead and talk about the film effects. And then in the last video, we'll talk about color grading, and we'll talk about LUTs, and then I'll do the sample, and that will be probably the time that we have for today. Which means that on the office hour, if you want to stick around, or if you don't and want to get the video later in the week, we will be doing a simple post-process material. I'll show you guys how you can make something kind of straightforward, like a toon shader for post-processing. Also, something you can set up in the material. It changes from what you want to do. You might want to set up a material plus a post-processing effect to get the cumulative effect of a toon shader, but I'll show you guys how to make a very basic toon shader in the post-process volume, especially if you need something a little bit more toony in a smaller area that is not related to the entire texture generation of the game. In fact, it might be a little easier once you have some textures made to convert those textures into toon shader textures by changing the properties of light using the post-process volume rather than rework all the textures in your scene. Alright, let's go ahead and have a little talk about the film section of this. Now, we're not going to worry about the advanced settings because those get a little bit more obtuse and deals more with post-production than actual production, but we'll talk about what these do anyways when we get there. Now, let me be frank here and explain what Unreal thinks about film, or rather the film settings. So let me give you the discussion. A few of you have already reached out and talked about this, especially related to the Academy color encoding system. We don't cover a lot of visual production in this particular class, mostly because I myself am not much of a visual producer myself. I've only ever worked with chroma keys a few times, and mostly in Nuke, not necessarily in Unreal. Kind of a newer element to the Unreal Engine that I'm not 100% familiar with. However, as of the current version of Unreal, the current version of Unreal is using ACES, which is a standard filmic tone mapper, right? So color is going to be consistent and preserved across a bunch of different formats and a bunch of different displays. So what essentially you're doing is, even if the color mapping looks a little bit different on your computer, you're going to get the same adjusted colors and blacks, and you will not have to adjust every monitor to be ideal for what the scene is supposed to look like. So essentially the filmic look is supposed to have like a very generalized, like, it uses kind of like a mathematical S-curve. Not that it's important, but you need to understand that what is happening in the background is the tone mapper and the filmic tone mapper, which is what this is. The default standards are going to be what each of these elements can do and what they do for the overall look. It is recommended that changes to these properties over here on the right are used for project-wide specific looks and not dynamically changed or changed shot by shot. Instead, if you are going to be doing any kind of color grading or any kind of, so basically this is what sets the standard. You do not want to change them. You want to set these and then leave them alone and have them consistent across your entire game or across your entire film. If you need to make any artistic adjustments, you should do it in color grading. Film is the standard by which everything gets pressed to. Color grading gets pressed to film, which is why you don't want to mess around with film too much. I'm going to talk about these elements and then I'll showcase what's going on. So, slope is pretty straightforward. This is just the steepness of the tone mapper, where larger values will make things darker, lower values will make the... Here, let me show you. It's not exactly darker per se, but you can see how the tones are lost when we go lower and the tones are enhanced when we go higher. I do believe we can actually break that by going up higher than we need to. Right? But generally speaking, you wouldn't want to use that much more anyways. Whereas 1 is the default base standard, going above that would break the slope. Shoulder, actually I should talk about toe as well. So we'll leave slope on, we'll leave it at default value. Toe adjust the dark color in the tone mapper. And only the dark colors. This is a global setting that affects the curve of the other ones. This adjusts only the darks. Again, there's a reason why you don't want to modify these dynamically. Any artistic changes you want to make, you set these once, you leave them alone, you do it in color grading. Shoulder, we'll leave that to default. We'll adjust the bright color. This effect is not profound, but it adjusts mostly the bright colors. Let's go ahead and throw a high number in there. It might be, yep, it's racked. So it's racked so you can't actually go past a certain value and get any results. Can we go negative? Of course we can. Doesn't do anything. So yeah, this adjusts the bright color in the tone mapper. Let's leave back default. Our black clip. This is where the crossover essentially happens, where blacks start to cut off their value. You should not adjust this. Does anyone know what this effect is over here? This is an exposure problem. This is called crushed blacks. Your scene should never have a crushed blacks or I know there's a thing that people say crushed whites, but essentially crushed whites are an overexposure, blacks are underexposed. Essentially what's happening is the color is being cut off, and what you are getting here, even though it's technically physically impossible with the way that the global illumination works, is our blacks are being clamped all the way to 100%, and there's no difference between this area over here and this area over here, despite the fact that there is a soft gradient going from right to left over here. This doesn't care. You don't want, unless I guess you're going for like a filmic style that uses this kind of lighting, there's no reason why you want to mess with your black clip to do that effect. White clip is kind of the same thing, but for your whites. This is very subtle, so let's see if I can even do anything. Yes, look at the clouds. Again, subtle effects, cumulative effects is where you get the most amount of horsepower out of the post-process volume. We have post-process tint, which shouldn't do a whole lot, I think. See if I can even force it. Again, it's a very, very subtle effect. See if I can get it to do something here so that you guys can see it, so you guys know I'm not lying. Let's see, can I get a result? They may have removed... Okay, so let me explain this. I believe in 4.17, which you guys are not using because we're using Unreal 5, these options shouldn't do anything. Now, let's see if we can get it to do anything. We're inside the post-process volume and it's not doing anything. Okay, so what this section is, everything below white clip down to tint, saturation, and contrast. You see that nothing's happening? This is part of the old Tonemapper. If you are using anything before Unreal 4.15, I believe, those will work. In Unreal, modern Unreal, which is 4.27 right now, and Unreal, which is, 4.27 is live version. We are on 5th. We are, 5.0 early access. These elements do not work for the tone mapper that is built by default inside the engine. Let me get rid of this light here because it's throwing me off. This does not work anymore. This area down here is for the default old school tone mapper. It's not going to do anything for us. This effect doesn't even do anything. One thing that I usually do is if I am testing out an effect to see if it actually has an effect on the world, what I'll do is I'll crank it and then I'll see what it's doing. As you can see, we're not getting any kind of saturation or contrast. These are part of the old tone mapper system and don't do anything. If you want to edit tint, saturation, and contrast, you actually have to do it over here. Got a white balance up here. Here's tint. Tint. Sorry, I broke it for a sec. There we go. inside of the color grading. So I've talked about the filmic color grading here. We're going to go ahead and disable all these. Again, this is something that you would want to set at the onset of your lighting, and then this would be consistent throughout the game for the entire game. This sets kind of the way that the quality of the film is going to orate the rest of your colors. Your color grading should be used for artistic purposes, and this is where you can spend a lot of time as well. We won't spend too much time, but I do want to talk about it anyways. So in the next video, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about color grading, and then we're going to go from there. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.